Good evening, everyone. We're going to start in a few minutes. We're going to give our attendees a chance to get into the meeting, and then we'll start promptly in about 1 minute. So if you'll just hang on, it's going to be a great webinar. We have some really wonderful panelists and some great information to share with y'all tonight. While we're waiting on folks, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Yvonne Brandon. I'm Chair of Public Schools First NC. And with me tonight is my colleague, Lynn Edmonds, who is the Outreach Director for Public Schools First NC. And I'll introduce our panelists in just a minute. But we're happy you're here. If you have questions, we're going to have an opportunity at the end of the meeting to ask questions and get some great answers. If by any chance you have to leave early and you didn't get your questions answered, if you will email us, we will find out and get back to you. So and we will also record this meeting tonight, and it'll be on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So you'll have a chance to go back in case you missed something and hear it again. So I'm going to go ahead and let us get started. Tonight we're going to be talking with Representative Julie von Haefen and Senator Wiley Nichols. I want to tell you that today I was just bragging on Julie because she has introduced a great bill today on the very first day of the General Assembly. You know, she was able to get a bill introduced, so we're really proud of her for that. She's already been working hard, but she is an attorney, and she has 3 children in the public school system. Before Julie joined the NC House, she served as Wake County PTA president, where Lynn and I met her and got an opportunity to work with her here in Wake County. And she's also was on the North Carolina PTA Board of Directors. Julie also is a certified guardian ad litem in Wake County. As you know, that's a big job, takes a lot of time and a lot of passion for children. She received her bachelor's degree from Ohio University and her law degree from Case Western Reserve University. She practiced law for 10 years in a variety of areas, including criminal law, medical malpractice, defense, municipal law, and education law. So we're really happy that she's here. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Wiley. He'll be joining us shortly. He's having a few technical difficulties. But Senator Wiley Nichols is a practicing attorney also in Cary, North Carolina, where he lives with his wife, Caroline, and they have 2 children. He graduated from Tulane University as a political science major, and he got his law degree from Pepperdine University School of Law. In the state Senate, he is focused on strengthening public schools, ending the stain of gerrymandering, and expanding access to affordable health care and protecting our environment. So I'm going to go ahead and give you just a quick look at the overview of our agenda tonight. Some of the things we're going to try to cover. We're going to talk a little bit with Julie and Wiley about the long session and what that is versus a short session. Talk a little bit about the budget that they're going to be developing this spring, about new committee chairs, redistricting, COVID. Do bills carry over? A lot of our attendees have asked that over and over again. With the new session starting, what happens to the bills? Do they carry over? And we're going to be talking about Leandro. Hopefully many of you had an opportunity to see our workshop on Leandro a couple weeks ago. If not, again, it's also on our YouTube channel if you get interested after this tonight. And then in our closing remarks, I'll give Julie and Wiley an opportunity to talk about any other public education issues or challenges they may have. So we're going to go ahead and keep moving forward. So hold on here. Just give me a second here, y'all. I think I have the wrong version of my PowerPoint. Just give me a second here. I apologize. That's what I did. Just give me 1 second. I apologize immensely. We made some last minute changes and I think that I forgot to update them.
Well, while we're waiting, Yvonne, maybe I'll just start and kind of just give an overview of the session and what's going to happen this year while you're pulling that up.
Would you please? Forgive me,
Sure.
everybody. This is what happens when you do something you shouldn't do, which is at the very last minute make some changes. But please go ahead. I have found the right one, and I'll be with y'all in a second.
Okay. Well, I know Senator Nichols trying to get in. We're trying to figure it out, but I'll just go ahead and start, and hopefully we can get him on eventually. But thanks for having me on tonight. Public Schools First NC is an organization that's close to my heart. As Yvonne mentioned, my work with Wake County PTA and North Carolina PTA, Public Schools First NC has always just been such a strong partner with PTAs all across the state to make sure that parents and educators and the community are just well informed about public school issues. So thanks for having me on tonight and for your continued advocacy. So I know tonight we just wanted to kind of give a broad overview about the legislative session. So I'll just kind of start by saying the session started 2 weeks ago, and there was a day on the 13th where everyone was sworn in. It's kind of a ceremonial day. And then we took a 2-week hiatus, and then today was actually the first day, the technically first day of session, where we were able to file our first bills. So no bills have been filed before today. And like Yvonne said, some bills are filed today, including my bill to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, which is a whole nother topic that we won't go into tonight. But there were some education bills filed today, and I think we'll talk a little bit about those as we go. So what happens with the bills once they're filed? So once a bill is filed, basically it's read in to the clerk by the clerk of the House that it's filed in. So if it's filed in the House, the clerk there will read the bill, and all the bills that were filed today will be read in tomorrow. So that's usually what happens. And then in the Senate side, it's the same thing, and maybe Senator Nichols can correct me if he gets on. But the bills are read in, and then they're assigned to committees. So in the House, I can't remember off the top of my head how many committees we have this session, but they've changed a little bit from session to session. Sometimes the speaker, who is the one who creates the committees and assigns all the members to the committees, he might mix up a little bit what kind of committees he wants, and I'm sure he does that in consultation with other members of leadership. So we just got our committee assignments on Monday, so we just found out what committees we're going to be serving on. Just today we got a schedule of when all those committees are going to be meeting. And so when the bill is read in, it's assigned to the committees that it will be heard in. And so it basically starts the process of going through that. Now, let's take an education bill, for example. So today, a bill was filed to raise the minimum wage for non-certified school staff to $15 an hour, which definitely needs to be done. And I've signed on immediately as the co-sponsor of that bill. That's the other thing. So in the House, you can have 4 primary sponsors of a bill. They're the ones that introduce the bill, they write it. They're the ones that, you know, are kind of the top names, and their names are on the bill. And then everyone else can sign on after that bill is filed. Everyone else can sign on as a co-sponsor. So that means you're putting your name on that bill, that's something that you really support and that you want to see happen. So basically every night in session, I go onto our member dashboard, and it shows all the bills that have been filed for the day. And then I can go in and I can electronically select the bills that I want to put my name on as a co-sponsor. So I did that today, for example, for that bill. So tomorrow when the bill is read, the speaker will say, okay, this, you know, House Bill 3 is going to be referred to education K-12. It's going to be referred to appropriations. It's going to be referred to I don't know, rules committee. So say those are the three committees it's going to go through. So the first stop is at the education K-12. Now that doesn't mean that that bill is going to actually be heard in that committee. That is up to the committee chair, and the committee chair basically directs what bills are really going to move forward in the process. So they have a lot of power over the process of what bills get through. So if I had filed that bill, I would go to probably the education K-12 committee chair and say, please, will you hear this bill? These are the reasons that I want you to hear it. And then all the people who might advocate for that bill, like Public Schools First, PTA, teachers, you know, all those people should be calling up the education K-12 chair and say, please hear this bill in the committee. It's really important. You know, I think that your members should vote on it. And so then if the chair decides to do that, it will be heard in committee, and then it will make its way through each committee in the same way. Now, for some miracle that bill gets all the way through all the committees and it's passed through, it comes back to the floor of the House for a vote of the entire body. So that's kind of the process. And then if it passes on the House floor, it will go to the Senate and start that process all over again. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen like the Schoolhouse Rock on like how a bill becomes a law. And it's similar here in North Carolina. So it's a long process, and that was one thing I learned last year as a freshman. I'm in my second term now, that I need to get started early on things because it takes a long time to get through this process. And then there's a date in May, and this year it's on May 13th. By May 13th, your bill has to cross over to the other chamber or else it dies. So basically by May 13th, that education bill would have to pass through all those committees in the House, get voted on the floor of the House, and then be able to move to the Senate by May 13th. And that's called crossover. So you might hear that date. So that's
And
kind of the process of what's going to happen this year.
And we have some bills later on. We kind of got off here. I apologize again to our guests tonight that I started us off on one foot here, on the left one. But Julie, I want to just pause for just a second here. As you were talking about the committees, this is a slide I want to just share with our guests tonight really quickly. These are the education committees that Public Schools First normally will be monitoring. And these are the ones that Julie just talked about. They're going to staff these this year. They'll appoint senators and House members to these committees. And then we will be monitoring the bills that they get and what they're moving in and out, like Julie said. So this is nothing that we need to spend much time on, but I do want to say that it's very important. One of the questions that people have asked me and Lynn many times over the last 4 or 5 months is, do the bills carry over? Because Julie, you were involved in some of these bills that were introduced the last time. And so can you kind of explain to folks what actually happens with some of these really good bills that did not pass last session?
Well, the simple answer to that question is no, they don't carry over. So none of those bills, all those bills that were filed last session are essentially dead. The bill has to make it through that process in the same legislative session. Some bills can actually be carried over from the long session to the short session, and there's it's very finite number, and there's certain types of bills that can, that they don't have to do that crossover requirement, but all these types of bills, would need to have gone through last session. And so all the bills that were on there are probably going to be refiled again this year, and they'll have different bill numbers, and they might have a little bit of different language. But if you could go back, Yvonne, real quick on that slide, you can see that last session, House Bill 359, for example, was filed, the $15 minimum wage for non-certified school employees. That's the bill that was basically refiled today, and now it has a different number. I think it's like House Bill 6 or something. So, and also, of course, the numbers are the order that the bills are filed. So, like, for example, House Bill 1129 and 1130, they have really high numbers because those were filed in 2020 during the short session.
And we won't talk about these two bills right now, but they have special significance to our discussion later tonight and when we talk about Leandro. because these two bills are kind of considered the Leandro bills. And Julie, again, you're catching up with my mess here of getting us on the wrong foot here. But as Julie said, this is the slide that has the crossover, has the dates for when you can file everything. This is too much to go over now, but we just want to tell our audience that all of this information is on the website for the North Carolina Legislative website, and they have a calendar there for the House and the Senate. And if you go there, all these dates will be there, and then just a slide ahead so that we can get to the other stuff. This is what Julie was talking about. Is there anything else you wanted to share about this slide, Julie?
Well, just those are the 4 types of bills that don't have to meet crossover deadline. So for example, number 2, like my ERA bill today, it's not subject to crossover. So it doesn't have to meet that May 13th deadline because it's a ratification of an amendment to the Constitution.
Okay, and before we jump into the budget, I want to take us back just for a second to our very first slide. When a lot of folks, I wanted to see if you could give us just a quick little COVID-19 update. We're getting a lot of questions about that, and I know that there will be other discussions around the budget and COVID, but I wondered if you could share with us a little bit about what you think is going to happen this year from the state and federal level with COVID relief.
Yeah, so you know, as you know, the federal government did already passed, you know, a COVID relief bill, and that money is going to be coming down to North Carolina fairly soon. And we're getting some information, you know, about how much money is going to go to education, for example, out of that CARES funding. And so I just got some information today from Legislative Analysis that they basically said that $1.6 billion will be coming in North Carolina for elementary and secondary schools. So that's really great, and what's much needed, of course. So, and it basically, they said that those funds can be actually used for facility repairs and air quality improvements, which I guess the last time they weren't allowed to be used for that. So that's good. And then also, they can also use those funds for, like, for example, funding childcare for instructional staff, purchasing digital curricula. So it gives a little bit more flexibility to the school districts for that money. So that's really good. And I actually got some information on, you know, how much they estimate each LEA will get in North Carolina. And I won't go into all those numbers, but I can pass that on to you all if you want to post it on your website if that's of interest. But I will say that, like, for example, I think it's estimated that Wake County Public Schools, which is where I represent, will get almost $98 million of money for COVID. So that's really great news because, of course, our school districts are operating on budgets that were passed before the pandemic hit, and they've been really struggling to make ends meet. So I will say that I think that that's all great news, but the problem with that is that I fear that that means that the General Assembly won't feel that they will have to appropriate money, that they'll just say, well, the federal government gave, you know, schools money, and so we don't need to really do anything right now. I do know that the governor, you know, I think that he wants to propose that teachers and school staff and also higher education staff and educators would get one-time bonuses, basically just to thank them for everything that they've been going through the last year or so. And I think that he's going to propose that, you know, as a bill that we would introduce in the House or the Senate. So anyway, so that's where we stand as of right now. I think Senator Nichols trying to get on, getting some feedback. So anyway, so that's what I think that's where things stand as of right now.
Wiley, are you with us now? I think you're going to have to hang up on one of them and come back on the other. I'll try to make Wiley feel better later by telling him I pulled up the wrong PowerPoint. Maybe that'll feel better since he's had such a hard time getting on here. So, okay. I'm going to give you a chance to speak.
Can you hear me now? Am I?
You can. So I'm just going to catch you up to date really fast, Senator. We have already introduced you. Julie did a great job of kind of explaining the overall process that we are going to see in the long session. She did a great job of talking about how bills are made. We've talked about crossover. And what we're doing now before we jump into the budget is she's kind of gave us a little look at what we expect from COVID funding that's coming down, and she's done a good job of that. And then and maybe what we should jump to is something that I know you care a lot about, Wiley, is can y'all give us a little overview of what you expect to happen this year in terms of redistricting? Everybody's waiting on the census data. Another question we get a lot is, you know, what will happen locally at the state level, so forth. So, Wiley, maybe you can give Julie's voice a break. She's been carrying this PowerPoint for us, and maybe you can share with us some of the information about redistricting.
Well, yeah, sorry about that, Julie. Thank you so much. And so glad to be here, Yvonne. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to be here and talk with folks who are passionate about public education. Julie and I, by the way, have done a lot of these together. So we've got it down. We were before we scheduled this, after we scheduled this, we were both elected co-chairs of the Wake County delegation. So we've been working very hard together to move the ball forward for a number of issues for Wake County. So it's, you know, we hopefully we'll have a real, you know, good kind of shtick back and forth, comedy routine at some point. Hopefully it's not unintentional laughter like technical problems, but redistricting, very excited. That really is gonna be one of the most important issues that we face this year in the legislature. You know, every 10 years we draw our maps after the census. North Carolina will gain a seat in Congress. We'll go from 13 to 14 seats. And this will be something that affects, you know, all of the House races, Senate races, and races for Congress based on the way we draw maps. So it's something that I would really encourage people to make your voices heard on, to be engaged. You know, certainly my position is politicians should not be choosing their voters. Voters should be choosing their politicians. We should have a nonpartisan independent commission. That is not the indications we've gotten from the leaders of the General Assembly that that's what they want to do. So it's something that I think will likely wind up in litigation like we've had every single year, you know, for quite a long time with maps that continue to change. But hopefully we can get maps that will be representative of, you know, the communities of interest and will be good, fair maps. So that's one that is going to be coming a little later on, probably in the summer when we get final, you know, census data. That data is taking longer than normal because of COVID. But when we do, the legislature will draw maps. I am on the Senate redistricting committee, so I'll be part of those at the committee level and spending a lot of time on it. So I'd encourage people to please follow that process and get involved. You know, put in public comments. You know, one of the things that I think especially is important for people who care about public education is defining what a community of interest is when drawing a map. And for me, one of the most important communities of interest is public universities, colleges. You know, I don't think you know, we should have maps that cut a college campus in half. So, you know, we need to define those as a community of interest, and you know, for public comments and issues, probably to make lay the path for litigation, you know, to describe those in public comments. So that's one area I think folks should think about participating in.
Well, let me ask you quickly. I think you mentioned summer, so that's the second question that we've gotten in some of the webinars we've been doing, which is when is the census data going to be here? So what is the latest y'all heard, Julie?
Yeah, I actually just heard yesterday that what's called the reapportionment data, I guess is what you say, that won't be released until April 30th. And then the redistricting data isn't expected to be released until July 30th. So that means, you know, the redistricting is going to be like, I think Senator Nichols said, like in the fall, by the time we kind of get organized and get started.
That's really unfortunate, and I think I won't make y'all do this now, but I understand that it also impacts some county and school board and city races too if we get the data that late. So I don't know if there'll be any changes in how that's handled by the General Assembly or not, but so stay tuned. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our next big topic, which is, you know, really important, is understanding for our audience what's going to happen. We have a 2-year budget coming up. If y'all could talk a little bit about the budget and how it works, and some of the things around COVID and Leandro funding, that would be really great.
Well, you know, I'm happy to just start up with some basics of the budget and kind of help folks know where we are. You know, Julie and I have served in the legislature for two years now, and in the 2 years we've been there, we haven't passed a budget yet. So we are both hopeful that we can be part of the first budget that's passed the legislature. And so that's that. But what that means, though, is we've got about $4.2 billion in unspent revenue because we haven't passed a budget in the last 2 years. That's all money that can be spent to do the things we need to do to make needed investment in public education, to help folks suffering from the COVID pandemic. And on that subject, we have 243 million federal dollars that can be used for COVID relief, you know, and in the public education context as well. So, you know, I think just, you know, for my opinion on the budget is this is really the most important issue, is how much money is in the budget and what we do with it. And we've lost close to $4 billion a year for several years now with tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy. I favor rolling back some of those tax cuts on corporations and the wealthy so that we can make needed investments in public education. And I'm not sure if we got into Leandro, but that's an especially important part of the budget context, just in the fact that the courts have said this year we need to have over $427 million extra devoted to specific places in public education, about half of that into teacher pay to get us closer to the national average. So as part of that budget context, you know, Leandro is especially important. And you know, it's not just Julie and I that are saying we need to make investments in public education and raise teacher pay. It's the courts that are telling the legislature you have to make those investments.
And before we get into Leandro, I've got some slides where we can get a little bit deeper into Leandro. Julie, have you heard anything about any federal funding initiatives or any trends that we're seeing from the federal level of money other than COVID? Of course, you've mentioned that. Any other trends and things that our state is lobbying for at the federal level?
Well, I mean, right now, I mean, I think with the new administration, you know, there's a lot of hope that we're going to be getting some more, you know, interest in funding public education. And, you know, now that we have Betsy DeVos isn't there anymore, and, you know, diverting all of our money to charters and private schools. But I think that what I'm hopeful for, and that I think I've heard some interest in from the federal government, is a deeper investment in early education. That's something that's really I've been really focusing a little bit more on in the last year or so. And really the reason that I started focusing on it more is just hearing more about the devastating effects of the pandemic on early education and on childcare in this whole country and in our state. And so I think that the Biden administration really realizes that this is a really important issue. And I mean, it's been a major problem for a long time. I mean, we should be funding early education just like we fund K-12 education. I mean, if you think teachers at the K-12 level are paid poorly, you haven't talked to an early ed teacher. I mean, they barely make a living wage, and a lot of them don't even have health insurance. A lot of our early education workers are the people that we talk about that fall within that coverage gap that you probably hear a lot about with Medicaid expansion, because they have jobs, you know, but they don't make enough, and they don't make, you know, they make too much to qualify, but not enough to buy it on their own. So they fall within that coverage gap. And so we really need to rethink how we, you know, how we pay our early education teachers. And a lot of the funding of early education comes from the federal government through block grants that go through our DHHS department. And so I'm hoping that, you know, I did hear that through the COVID funding, they are offering a lot more block grants through some of that funding I mentioned before, but I'm hoping that there'll be longer term fixes to that going forward as well.
Okay, and one of the briefs that we read last week was from some of the folks who watched the federal level, the U.S. Education Department, is that they were agreeing with you, Julie, that there is a commitment, a real interest, and they've kind of put pre-K, special ed, and helping professionals kind of at the top of their list. So we're very hopeful. I'm glad to hear that you and Wiley are also supporting that. And we know that special ed funding that comes from the feds is woefully less than what is needed for each child that has special education services. So I won't drag us down into that conversation too much, except to say, I hope that the General Assembly also will be looking at pre-K and special education and looking at those helping professionals in our school. So maybe it would be good if you guys would not mind taking a few minutes to talk a little bit about Leandro, since it is on the radar of lots of our advocates in the state of North Carolina, a lot on the hearts of a lot of our legislators and our parents and our teachers and our kids. And of course, as you said, it is a legal requirement. So Julie, would you mind kind of telling our audience a little bit of an overview of Leandro versus the state of North Carolina? And who better to talk about this than two attorneys, right, Lynn? So we're really glad to have two attorneys talk about this.
Well, I'm not going to read, you know, everything on the slide. I think Yvonne did a great job of kind of giving a timeline there. So maybe I'll just kind of go up to where we are now. But I mean, Leandro is like a 25-year-old court case that's been going on in North Carolina. Bottom line is that the courts, you know, said that the state is not fulfilling their constitutional obligation to provide every child with a sound basic education, which is what it says in our state constitution. And so there's a lot of elements of why we're not complying with our constitutional obligation. And this West Ed report that you might have heard about that came out in 2019, which is, you know, a really great thing to read over, light reading, you know, if you want to take some time with it. But it gives a really good overview and gives recommendations of how we can be back in compliance with that obligation. And so the problem is that right now that the General Assembly, and when I say the General Assembly, I mean leadership, meaning Senator Berger and Speaker Moore, they disagree in the fact that the court has basically said that we must fund Leandro. We must, you know, put money toward these elements that they cite in the report. And what the legislature is saying is there's separation of powers. The courts can't make us spend money, basically, is their argument. And so my understanding from talking to the governor's office is that the governor and DPI have been trying to have meetings with leadership in the General Assembly and say, hey, you know, the court is telling us to do this. Let's sit down and figure out how we can do this. And they won't even sit down to a meeting. So it's like they're just putting their, you know, heads in the sand and saying we're not going to talk to you, which is pretty childish in my opinion. But that didn't prevent us in the last session in 2020 from going ahead and filing some bills. And I was the lead sponsor of one of those bills, 1130, and then there was another bill, 1129, that a group of us in the Democratic House Caucus put together in partnership with the governor's office and the team that's been working on Leandro, basically as like a roadmap for the General Assembly to say, this is what we would need to do in compliance with the West Ed report. And you can still pull up those bills on the General Assembly website. So you can go and search them up. You just put in the last session, so the 2019-2020 session, and then House Bills 1129 and 1130. So 1129 was called Ensure a Sound Basic Education. So that was all the policies that we felt would have to be implemented to comply with Leandro. And I won't go through all of them. I'll just mention a couple of them. One, it would be a big thing that they talk about, Leandro, is of course diversity and equity, and the fact that we have to increase our teacher diversity in North Carolina. So one of those was, for example, to require the State Board of Education to develop and increase the racial diversity of teachers in both recruitment and retention. And it had benchmarks, that they would have to do this X, Y, and Z by. Some of the other things would be like aligning the K-12 calendar to community college calendars, so that kids can, easily go from K-12, into community college. There was establishing, offices of equity oversight. There was budget flexibility for local school boards, which I know here in Wake County, we've been pushing for a long time. In my opinion, we need to give as much flexibility to local school districts because they know what's best for their kids and their teachers, not us up here in Raleigh figuring out what they should do. So those are some examples. And then 1130 was invest in a sound basic education. So that was the appropriation bill. Then it went through all the numbers basically of like, this is how much money we'd have to give to each of these things to implement it. So just to catch you up to date with what's going on with it, with Leandro now, the court ordered the plaintiffs to put together an 8-year plan, basically, to implement the West Ed report. That plan was supposed to be due, I guess, back in December, but there was an extension granted till February 15th. So that's coming up here. So you should be seeing something coming out with this grand 8-year plan of how this would all be implemented. And right now, myself, along with that Leandro team in the House, is working with DPI and the governor's office to, again, create some legislation to try to implement Leandro again in the General Assembly.
So Wiley, you want to add anything to that? I do want to back up and just say that back in September of 2020, that short-term plan is what Wiley was talking about earlier. The short-term, just kind of get us through 1920, was for the $400 and some million budget. And of course, the day that the judge ordered that or approved that consent decree was filed, the next day the General Assembly went home. And we haven't heard from y'all since, till you're back now. So our understanding, Wiley, is that all of that now will be wrapped in again, this new 8-year plan with a budget for each single year by all of these categories you see on the screen here. And so the only way that will be implemented is, as Julie says, is for legislators to introduce bills to fund these 8 critical needs. Is that right, Wiley?
That's 100% correct, and Julie said it really well. We just can't continue to ignore the court's rulings here. I think for lawyers, this is great. There's plenty of money that's going to be made by lawyers fighting this stuff in court, instead of getting money to our kids in our schools. But yeah, no, that's exactly it. What where the rubber meets the road is just the first year of this, which is an extra $427 million, more than half for teacher pay, another $144 million to revise the formula to help put more money to students with the greatest needs, and then other money for students at risk of failing academically, and more money to expand early childhood education programs. So those are the 5 of the most basic kind of places where the court says you got to do more here. And it's pretty simple to just follow whether or not the legislature funds those areas.
So the question that we're often asked is, so the plan comes out February 15th, and this is just asking for your opinion. So it comes out the 15th. if the General Assembly's long session comes and goes and there are no bills introduced or no bills passed that directly impact this plan, what will the judge do, if anything, and what should advocates in the community who are concerned about this, what avenues would they have to the judge or to the court system overall to rectify or remedy this condition?
Well, what I think is going to happen is that I think the General Assembly might take up some of the things in Leandro. That's what I'm hopeful for, is that maybe we can get some consensus around some of the things, but I don't anticipate, them taking up one of our, omnibus bills that like we filed in the short session that has every single thing that we need to do. I think the conversation just internally with us is, whether we should file a huge bill again, or we should try to pick and choose things out of Leandro that we think that we can actually get through. And so if the leadership of the General Assembly says, well, we increased funding for early ed, and we established an Office of Equity, and we we did some things around school performance grades. So I'm just taking like 3 examples that were in Leandro. And then they say, well, we did those things. So then they go to the court and say, we're working on it. We're trying. Like, they might use those things as like an example of that they're trying to move toward those goals. I mean, of course, it's not as quickly as I think we or the court would want to see. But what I fear is they're going to kind of pick little things and then use that as evidence that they're trying to meet those requirements. And also, I think, we need to be getting them on record that, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that can be done through floor debate or, filing bills that they won't take up, so there's some strategy here a little bit on our side to kind of give the court evidence that they're not complying with that court order, and then that can be used, later. So as far as what advocates can do, I think, everything that everyone's been doing is fantastic, just keeping the conversation out in the public. There's Every Child NC is really doing a great job, keeping all that out there. And but I think just keeping the pressure on is probably what we need to do at this point.
And go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I think Julie said it really well. Public schools First NC is just an amazing leader, and the information that, you put out with this group feels a crucial need to educate folks. And, like Julie said, being active, with your legislators. We work for you. Our job is to represent you and be your voice in the legislature. You've got a representative and a senator. I certainly encourage folks to reach out to them. And I think just an effective thing to do is not just to reach out to people that you disagree with and tell them that you don't like what they're doing, but when you have a representative or a senator who's doing the things that you like, encouraging them to continue doing that. When they support a bill that you like, tell them you like that. I just have seen that work very well with my colleagues, where they continue to focus on issues when they get a lot of positive feedback too. So I think that's just a small thing that is helpful too.
And Julie mentioned Every Child NC. I'll just say to our audience that is a coalition of over 25 organizations who all support the funding the Leandro recommendations in the West Ed report. This is a group that's representing hundreds of thousands of members in their own organization that have all come together and spent the past year following this case, as you, Wiley and Julie both said, following Judge David Lee and his taking up of this case after Judge Manning retired. And we won't go into all those details, but we have an excellent slideshow presentation on Leandro on our YouTube channel. But the point that y'all are making, Julie and Wiley, is that we have been at this for over 25 years. And what has often happened for many of us who've been watching this case and working on this case is that we get a little closer and somebody does a few things. A few things will change, a few things have been added, a little funding here, but we've never had a comprehensive approach to really answering the legal requirement that we provide every child with a sound basic education. I will say to our guests tonight, please go and look up the West Ed report. You can Google it, you'll find it really fast. Go to our website, Public Schools First, and look under issues Leandro. We have lots of great links there. And take some time to really study this case, because this represents, in my view, after following this case for the last 2 decades, it represents our best, most comprehensive, nonpartisan look. Independent researchers look at what we can actually do and should do for all of our kids. And with a new 2-year budget, if we don't do it now, Wiley, when will we do it?
No, we've got to. And one of the things too, I think that's important is this is an issue about our economy. It's a business issue. It's one of the top issues when I talk to all of the different chambers of commerce in my district. They are very clear that employers want very good, very strong public schools for their employees and to recruit new companies and new business to our state. So this isn't just about having good schools. It's about our economy as well. And there's a very wide group of support for making these necessary investments.
Okay.
Senator Nickel, can you please remind the audience about the difference between how much is in the rainy day fund, which is a lot of money in the rainy day fund, and what's supposedly just sitting in the bank that is separate and above what is in the rainy day fund? Can you please talk about that?
Yeah, so right now, if you're talking to your legislators, there is $4.2 billion of unspent money because we didn't pass a budget over the last 2 years. And then there's another $1 billion in the rainy day fund. So that is a ton of money that we can use to do just that small $427 million that the courts are asking for additional money for public education. So that money is there. We without rolling back tax cuts, have plenty of money for it. I certainly wouldn't like to do even more, but we can do this.
Yeah, I was going to say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say, if we wanted to fund my bill 1130, that was the investing in a sound basic education, the fully funding that bill would be 131 million, which is out of that 4 billion is just a drop in the bucket. So we could fund that entire bill with the money that we have right now.
And I just got to throw out these numbers because I love talking about them. But 2 bills I worked on: a nurse in every public school. For Wake County parents, especially, you've got a nurse that goes to probably 3 different schools. Your kids barely see them. Especially important with coronavirus. That's like 50 million a year. That's 50 million. And then a bill that I worked on a lot last session with Public Schools First NC was the K-3 Reading Improvement Act. That would get 1 TA in every classroom, K-2, and additional funding for 3rd grade as well. That position has been decimated over the last 10 years. That's around 80 million. So, I mean, these are, when you're talking about 4 billion, there's a lot we can do to significantly improve public education with those needed investments.
And I threw this slide up here. We don't have to spend much time on it, but one of the things that we talk about a lot at Public Schools First is because we advocate for the entire state, is inequities that are developed by this chart. As you see, 66% of school funding for every county comes from the state, and then 24% is local. So what happens locally is that some counties have less money to spend. Some of it's due to their own tax base and their ability to raise taxes. Some of it's due to their allocation decisions that they make locally. But so what we end up having when we don't have these strong programs that Wiley and Julie are talking about, making sure that every school in any county has a nurse, making sure that every K-2 class has a teacher assistant, not just in Wake County or Mecklenburg County where we can afford to add more positions, making sure that a sound basic constitutional right to a sound basic education. So maybe y'all could comment on that. How can it really happen? Isn't that how we got into this mess? In that we had so many inequities across the state. And I think that our guests tonight who may be from rural counties, you should really pay attention to this because you're one of the organizations that or geographic areas that have really suffered through this low funding. So Julie or Wiley, I'll let you say whatever you'd like.
I was just going to say that, you know, I don't know if you said this, Yvonne, I'm sorry, I was trying to read the chat real quick, but really under the way that funding is supposed to work is that the state is only supposed to fund the infrastructure of schools and, you know, that, and then the locals are supposed to fund the teachers and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's really off kilter the way it is now because now the state is really just controlling everything that's going on across our state. And like I said before, in my opinion, you know, our local school districts need to have so much more flexibility. But the problem, like you said, is that the state has also put all this burden on the locals to, you know, fund way more that they need, that they're supposed to, and that's created this huge inequity. I will say that I sat on this really great study group last year that the Public School Forum of North Carolina did about rural education. And even though I represent, you know, Wake County, I want to learn more about, you know, the challenges that rural school districts are facing. And so I went to a series of 6 or 7 meetings that they had across, and I drove, you know, out to, you know, areas of the state that I'd never been to before. And it was really, really interesting. You know, to hear about the challenges, you know, that they have. And I'm sure we've all heard a lot about a lot of those challenges. I mean, whether it's broadband access, which has been, you know, obviously brought to the forefront during the pandemic, even more than it was when I was in these meetings a year ago. We had no idea that this was coming. And it was already a challenge then, and it's even worse now. But I think like the one big challenge that I really took away with that is our teacher pipeline, and our teacher pipeline is really suffering right now across the state, but it's even worse in these rural areas. I mean, we're having a hard time getting people going into teaching and teacher preparation programs. But if you think about who would want to go and teach at one of these rural districts in a really small town that they don't, you know, that they're not familiar with, and they get paid nothing, and there's no housing, and, you know, there's no supports, and they don't have TAs, and, you know, it's a huge challenge for these districts. And we heard from superintendents and principals, you know, in a lot of these districts, especially out in Eastern North Carolina, who are really, really struggling. And I think that unless we, you know, really rethink how we fund education in North Carolina, how we recruit teachers, how we treat teachers, it is not going to be good for the rural parts of our state. And those divisions between urban and rural are even going to get worse. And it honestly causes a lot of friction just even in the legislature. You know, I always feel like there's like this battle between the rural, you know, representatives and the urban members, and it shouldn't be like that because their success is our success, and we need to really support them as much as we can. And I think the only way we're going to be able to do that is to really rethink education in North Carolina through Leandro.
And Julie said it really well. You know, we're in this together as a state. You know, we see our jobs as representing, you know, our districts in Wake County, but also representing everyone in North Carolina. And the inequalities are continuing every single year for you know, rich urban counties and poor rural counties. And right. Here in Wake County, where we represent, you know, you've seen our county board of commissioners putting more and more money each year into public education to make up for the shortfall of the lack of support from the General Assembly. And, you know, that trend will continue unless we take action as a state. So that's something that I wish I had better news to report on, but folks should follow it and make that a real priority when you're instructing your legislators on what they ought to be doing in Raleigh.
Yeah, I think you both summed it up pretty good, and I'm going to move on. But I will say that, Julie, we've spent a lot of time doing like you, visiting in lots of rural counties over the past 5 years, talking with a lot of school board members and a lot of parents, and the inequities of what our state does. It should not be that you can get a great education based on your zip code, right?
That's what Leandro is all about, right?
So we've always said, as a state of North Carolina in our Constitution, that every child, regardless of and particularly in this conversation, your zip code. And right now, I really feel that it's unethical, me personally, that we have children who live in some small rural counties who are not getting the same quality education as some of the kids living in my county, Wake County. And you talked about nurses, Wiley. I would say that there are some school systems who have no nurses, or they have one nurse that comes from the health department for the entire school system. And in Wake County, we have a much more generous allocation. We have some counties that have no social workers or 1 or 2 social workers. In Wake County, we have 1 for every 2 schools. So these are not things that are fair. So I'll throw this one last slide up, although I think Lynn's question's already answered a big part of where can we get the money, because we've already talked about, in effect, we've got a lot of money sitting around right now. But I throw this up here because it's a slide that's very popular in when Lynn does a Leandro webinar, because it shows that North Carolina has the lowest corporate tax rate, the lowest. And we are still, even then, as the lowest. The next highest is Virginia and South Carolina, and they have it twice as high as ours is. And this is obviously, we use this slide to talk about how easily, Wiley, we could change the funding opportunities based on this one decision to cut corporate tax rates.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly love talking about wealth and income inequality. I'm going to be filing a bill that will do just that, to keep North Carolina as the lowest state for corporate taxes in the South at 5%. We can do that, and it's not going to affect businesses moving here. So, my bill would move corporate taxes to 5% in line with the lowest in the South, and then taxes on the wealthy, those in the top 1% who make over $500,000 a year, can afford to pay a little more, and that would get us $1.6 billion in new revenue that could go, mainly to public education. And again, when you're talking about, the courts saying, what we need to do to fulfill the promise of Leandro, that was, just less than a third of that. So, we have the ability to do this. We just need the political will. Joe Biden, I think, said it best, show me your budget and I'll show you what you value. So, I would just encourage folks to look at these budgets. And I don't want to get too partisan here, but, this is an issue where the Republicans who are in charge of the legislature have done a very good job of slashing taxes for corporations and the wealthy. And that's the choice we have as a state. Do we want to be by far and away half the taxes of the other cheapest states in the South for corporate taxes and taxes for the wealthy? Or can we roll back a little bit of those taxes on folks who have enormously benefited from this economy, to make those investments in our roads and our schools and our kids and our teachers? So I hope I'm not talking too long. I enjoy talking about this subject, but it's one where—
Senator Nickel, I've got a question for you in the chat. Someone's got a really great question. They want to know if there is any concern about the rainy day fund and that balance that we have sitting of unspent money. Is there a concern that those would not be recurring funds and therefore there's hesitation, or what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think we have to talk about everything at once, and wealth and income inequality and taxes, is something I think we need to be talking about, because my bill to move those corporate taxes up a bit, would be recurring money. In addition to the one-time money, rainy day fund money, that's one time. The 4.2 billion we have, that's one-time money, but adjusting the way we do our taxes to make sure the wealthy pay their fair share would be recurring. So it's an important subject when we're talking about the budget. What's non-recurring, what's recurring. Julie and I certainly like to talk more about putting things in the budget that are recurring. And I think if you're a teacher, or an educator, you shouldn't have to come begging to the legislature every 2 years to get an adjustment, even just for inflation. Other states, they put inflation into their budget every year with things like teacher pay. So they're not, so they know what they're going to get in 2 years and 4 years. And you talk to anyone in public education, and they don't really know what they're going to get, if it's going to be, a 2% or a 5% or a 0% raise, year over year. And that doesn't help recruit the best teachers.
So I think we should, before we do any kind of wrap up, let's go ahead and see if there are any other questions that folks have. They've been very patient tonight, allowing us to start with the wrong PowerPoint, Wiley. I have to share that with you so you feel better about having trouble getting on. And then, Lynn's been watching our question in our chat. Lynn, is there any other questions there that we could go ahead and let Julie and Wiley talk about before we jump into a closing?
Just one thing that we didn't cover, and that's one of our board members made the point that even if we get funding to hire more school nurses, that there's not enough out there to hire. And so we really need to make an investment in accelerated school nurse training and programs, and that would be something that we would encourage the legislature to consider in this budget cycle.
That's a great comment, and one that we're all certainly aware of. I think there's still an uphill battle to get that funding for additional nurses, but all we can do is fund the positions and hope the funding catches up. But if we are going to do it, we need to have the training and recruitment in there as well. So that's a great point. Whoever said that.
That hedges on something that came up on one of our previous webinars, and I wonder, Julie, if you and Wiley can react to it. But we've been doing a lot of work around school psychologists, and we've had several webinars, and I hope you've had a chance to see them. And one of the things that's really important, and especially in pre-K, special education needs, and pre-K children who are at risk, is a lack of school psychologists. And so in North Carolina, it's one of, there's just, the positions don't pay well. There's not enough positions in the state, and we're not producing enough. So it seems like this theme that Lynn brought up from the comment box is reoccurring, that, what can we do working with our 16 campuses? We have one of the most remarkable university systems in the nation in North Carolina. We have tremendous private institutions. Is there any interest in a study commission or something that would look at how we can start building this workforce program so that we have more opportunities for school psychologists and school nurses and school social workers? They're saying there's a real shortage in all of these key critical helping professionals.
Well, it's probably because, again, like, people don't want to go into those preparation programs because they see that there's no positions when they get out on the other side, right? So I think the first thing is we have to just create this position so that a student who might be entering UNC or NC State or something, like, sees, okay, when I get out, there's going to be a job for me, on the other side of it. So I think that's the first thing. I think that, we could do a better job of even recruiting people from other states to come in. I mean, again, it just goes back, when you look at our rankings on education and all these things, I mean, we're at the bottom of the barrel pretty consistently, especially with, ratio of nurses to students, you know, psychologists and social workers to students were way, way low on the list. So, you know, if I'm a school nurse and I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to go work in North Carolina, but I'm going to have, you know, 2,000 students per one nurse, you know, that's a pretty overwhelming thing to think about coming here to do. So we really need to, you know, improve some of those ratios, I think, before we can really, you know, get to a point where people see this state as somewhere they want to come and see that profession as something that they want to invest their time and their money in.
So one of the suggestions I'll just share with y'all from the School Psychologists Association was that the General Assembly fund a robust internship program for school psychologists so that every school system would have a paid, at least one paid or two paid internship positions, so that they could use that to market and recruit, bringing in school psychologists who hopefully would stay after their internship and be picked up by the school board. So throw that out there to you. I know that community colleges is a great avenue for the nursing. We've already heard all of that. So
I got to make one plug on this issue for folks who really want to understand it. And Public Schools First has been a big supporter of this film and screening it. Resilience. There's a link to it on the Public Schools First NC site. I would just encourage anyone who hasn't seen it and wants to understand this issue a lot better to go click and find a way to see the film.
thank you very much. I'm going to plug that a little bit later, but nothing, I really appreciate you mentioning that because it's really key to some of the things we're talking about. So I just want to give both of you an opportunity to kind of wrap up here because as we're moving along. Any other issues that you see impacting special ed, any other challenges, just any closing remarks that you'd like to make? And maybe Wiley will let you go last since Julie went first. Julie, would you like to go ahead and share some of your wrap-up thoughts about this session and anything else you think we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, sure. You know, of course, going into the election last year, I think Democrats, I'm a Democrat, we were very hopeful that we were going to take at least one of the chambers in the General Assembly and see a lot of great progress towards some of these goals that we've mentioned today. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. So we have to go into this session with some realism that the General Assembly is still exactly the same as it was last session. You know, I think the Senate gained one Democratic member, but we lost 4 in the House. And it's not to say that all Democrats think the same way about public education or all Republicans think the same way. I would hope that, you know, we can come to some consensus. But if you look at the history of the General Assembly, you can kind of see how things have been going. So I want us to go into this session with a little bit of realism about what's going to happen with education bills and what we're going to be seeing. I will say that I'm very worried this session about using COVID and this narrative that I've been hearing about learning loss to harm public schools in a deeper way and in a different way, because I keep hearing, you know, students have lost, you know, years of, you know, their education and everyone's struggling. And so I think that that is going to be used to expand voucher programs and ESA accounts in North Carolina. And they're going to use that to say that, look, the public schools aren't doing a good job with remote learning, but our publics and our charters have been staying open and kids are thriving. So we need to give more opportunities for families to use these vouchers to go to those other programs. And it's going to continue to pull money away from public schools. I've also heard that there's going to be a push to, last session, we actually raised the salary that families had to make to qualify for vouchers. And I think that's going to happen again. They're going to make every opportunity to open those opportunity scholarships to more and more people. And that's my biggest worry going into this session. And so I just hope that we don't use the pandemic and everything that we've been going through, I mean, to further harm teachers in public education, because that's my greatest fear. And it would be such a tragedy to go out of the pandemic continuing that narrative that our public schools are failing, which is what they've been using for 10 years now to, continually make people feel like we're not doing a good job and teachers aren't doing a good job. And all the public education advocates that are on this call know how hard teachers have been working and how creatively they've been trying to reach their students in a really tough situation. And so as advocates, I just want everyone that's listening tonight or in the future to continue to lift those teachers up and continue to lift up your public schools. And so we don't feed into that narrative, and we really keep strong against that negativity. So that's what I see is coming. We're going to work as hard as we can, to push some good things like, the 15-hour minimum wage that we introduced today, Leandro, teacher raises, bonuses, the return of retiree medical benefits, which were taken away this year for teachers. Again, the nurses and the school counselors and the social workers that we've needed. And, getting schools back, where they need to be, hopefully by the fall, with vaccinating all teachers and getting our kids back into the classroom.
I'm just especially hopeful and optimistic about where we are right now, and I think it's just important to look at the things that have happened and will make a huge difference in all of our lives, and especially for public education. I worked for 2 White Houses. I worked for Al Gore when he was vice president. I worked for the Obama-Biden White House, and we got Joe Biden in the White House. Dr. Jill Biden as our first lady, an educator in the White House. She was in Cary, by the way, in my district on election day with me, talking to voters at the polls. So I think we're going to see a lot out of Washington. The special election in Georgia that flipped control of the Senate will mean a lot more money for state and local governments and much more of a focus on that federal slice of public education. I think we're going to see a lot of good things there. We have re-elected Governor Cooper. His mother was a public school teacher. He is someone who cares enormously about Leandro and making investments in public education. And I don't have to just look any farther than right here on this call. 4 years ago, I was with Al Gore on the inauguration day for the screening of his new document, his sequel to his documentary, An Inconvenient Sequel, in Sundance. And Julie was a PTA leader, statewide and here in Wake County. And we got upset at what happened in the election, and we picked up our clipboards and we started organizing. And we're now, in the North Carolina General Assembly fighting to fulfill the commitments we made to our constituents and to make real change. So I'm very optimistic about what we're going to do, because when you work hard, you organize, and you educate folks on these issues, you can make real change. And we're seeing that happen now, and we just got to keep pushing.
Thanks for spinning it positive. I feel like I was kind of negative, so it's really good you balanced me out a little bit there.
Hey, no.
And I'll try to give a positive spin here too. I think that one of the things that we're trying to do tonight, and I hope that our guests think we did, was just to really introduce you to 2 people and members of the General Assembly, to give you a little bit of an overview that this is going to be a long session. We're going to be here to July and August probably this year. There is going to be a new budget. It will be the 2-year budget for the next 2 years. So it's really critical that we pay attention to what's in that budget and that we speak up and we advocate. And we see that there's some other critical issues like COVID funding and how that gets used. We see that redistricting and exactly how we'll be voting and who will be voting on, what will be our voting districts is coming up. So this General Assembly, I have to say, and as someone who's been in this business for a very long time, might be one of the most critical 2 long sessions that we've had in over a decade, because of the many issues that are coming up. So where do we come in as individuals, as parents, as grandparents, as child advocates, as citizens and taxpayers? Our voice does matter. And I would strongly urge you to to stay committed to working on these issues. I think Julie and Wiley have done a great job of saying, you know, our heart is in Leandro, but it's going to take all of us. They're not going to be able to pass any bills or introduce any bills or even get them on the floor unless people in our community are speaking up. So if you don't know how to follow the General Assembly, we have a great, I hate to keep saying this, but yes, on our YouTube channel, there's a great video there on legislative update where we talk to you a lot about how to look up and find your senator and your House person, how to follow the calendar, and the things that you need to look for to follow bills and to understand how you can be involved and listen into the meetings. The virtual world that we're all in today, we all know how to use Zoom now or GoTo or WebEx or something like that. And luckily, a lot of the meetings in the General Assembly this year will be audio and some of them will be video. So it's really a great opportunity for our citizens to speak up and to be involved. In closing, I want to do a few business things really fast for Public Schools First. As I talked about, what is Leandro? You got a great chance tomorrow night. Our webinar is going to be airing tomorrow night. If you haven't registered, you can go on our Facebook page, Public Schools First, and under events, and you can register. And this is a very detailed look into exactly the lawsuit, where we are in the lawsuit, and all of the things that WestEd says we need. We've touched on just a tiny bit of it tonight in terms of teacher assistance and teacher pipeline, pre-K. There's so much more than that. And I think that as citizens could really see what's at stake and the excitement of what we could be doing, I think they will be on board. And as Wiley didn't know, but I have on here to plug that we do have the film coming up on Tuesday, February the 9th. Again, you have to register to get this because of our copyright. We have to have registered guests so that we can account for those. So please come and watch the film. I think you will really enjoy it. And then Julie, to end with, next October, we are going to have the impact of privatizing our public schools. This is our kind of second follow-up on this theme, because we think it's really critical when we look at what's happening and the impact of charter schools and vouchers, education savings accounts, and these kind of things on our public schools. If we don't stand up and protect our public schools now, we may not have a public school system that we can be proud of in the next 5 years. And so we take this really seriously, and we hope you'll save that date and come back and join us. And then in closing, you know the drill. We asked you to please support us. We're a small nonprofit that puts in hundreds of hours a week and probably thousands over a few months trying to advocate for strong public schools. So follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and go look at our stuff on YouTube. When we have a lot of likes and followers, and it helps us when we're trying to get funding and grants. So if you can, join us and get our newsletters. And Julie and Wiley, I appreciate very much your serving in the General Assembly. We know that's a very tough job. It's almost a full-time job for the next 9 months probably, and with a lot of very serious issues coming up. So we greatly appreciate that. We're going to probably have you come back in a couple months to see what's happening, what else has been introduced, where we are in the budget process. So as the budget starts developing and as we get that first draft of the budget, we may need to get you to come back so that we can have a chance to see what's in that budget and what we're going to be excited about and what we need to lobby to get in there. So if there aren't any other comments or questions, I want to thank you again for coming tonight and for advocating for us, and stay tuned. We'll be back to talk with all of you. If you're interested in having a virtual program in any of your schools, in any of your civic organizations, your groups, you can email Lynn at publicschoolsfirst.org, or me, Yvonne, at publicschools.org, and we will try to get you scheduled for a film or our workshop about resilience, or any of our legislative Leandro workshops. we're happy to visit with you on the internet. Just, send us an email and let us connect with you in your civic or organization or your volunteer organization. Again, good night to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.